The morning I found out my bank account had been emptied, I was standing in the middle of a grocery store holding a box of cereal I couldn't afford to buy. My card declined. I laughed it off at the register, that nervous, embarrassed laugh you do when you're hoping the universe is just playing a small, cruel joke on you. I handed the cashier my other card. Same result. I pulled out my phone right there in line, people behind me huffing and shifting their weight, and I opened my banking app. 0. Not low. Not overdrawn by a few dollars. 0. As in, the $47,000 I had spent the last 6 years building, gone. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every birthday dinner I cooked at home instead of going out, gone. The account I'd opened when I was 22, the one I'd labeled in my phone as my future, 0. The cashier asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. I was not fine. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I was 31 years old, standing under fluorescent lights in a grocery store I'd shopped at my whole life, and I had just discovered that the two people I trusted most in the world had been quietly, methodically, lovingly stealing from me for almost 2 years. My parents. Let me tell you how it started, not with greed, not with hatred, but with something far more dangerous. It started with love. I grew up in a house where sacrifice was the family language. My mother used to say that family was the only thing that mattered. She said it the way some people say prayers, repetitively, reverently, like saying it enough times would make it true enough to build a life on. My father was quieter about it, but he showed it in the way he worked himself half to death every decade, always for us, always for the family. I was the older child. My brother Ryan was 5 years younger, and from the moment he arrived, there was a softness in the house that had never existed before. I don't say that with bitterness, I loved Ryan. I still love him, in the complicated, bruised way you love someone who let things happen that they should have stopped. But I saw it early. There was a different math in our house when it came to the two of us. I got a second-hand bike for my 12th birthday. Ryan got a new one for his 7th. I paid for my own prom dress by babysitting for 3 months. Ryan's school trip to London was paid for without a second's hesitation. I took out student loans for university. Ryan's first semester was funded before he even registered. None of this felt malicious at the time. I rationalized it constantly. I was the older one. I was the more capable one. I was the responsible one. My parents always said I was strong like it was a compliment, and I absorbed it like it was one. Strong. That word. It's the word parents use when they want to take from you without feeling guilty about it. By the time I was 24, I had a good job in financial compliance, of all things. The irony of that hasn't escaped me since. I understood spreadsheets, I understood risk, I understood exactly how money worked. And yet, when it came to my own family, I was completely blind. I moved into my own apartment, started saving aggressively, and built my life with a quiet discipline that felt like identity. I didn't spend carelessly. I didn't travel extravagantly. I sent money home when my parents asked, which happened maybe 4 or 5 times a year, a few hundred here, a few hundred there. That felt normal. That felt like being a good daughter. What I didn't know was that the requests were only going to grow. And I didn't know that eventually, they would stop asking altogether. Around year 2 of my savings, when I had maybe $12,000 in my account, my mother sat me down one Sunday afternoon over tea and said she needed a favor. Not a favor. A family thing. Ryan was going through something. He dropped out of his business program halfway through the 2nd year and was struggling, and they wanted to help him get back on his feet, a small investment, really, into a business idea he had. She asked if they could borrow $4,000. I said yes. Because of course I said yes. He was my brother. He was struggling. I had the money. She asked if I could put it directly into their account rather than Ryan's, because they were handling it. I didn't think twice about it. 6 months later, she told me Ryan's business idea hadn't worked out, and they hadn't been able to pay me back yet, but they would. I said it was okay. It wasn't a big deal. I meant that. I meant it 3 more times over the next year and a half as the amounts got larger and the explanations got vaguer. And here's where I need to pause for a second, because if you've ever been the responsible one in a family, the one everyone leans on, the one who never says no, the one who gets told you're so mature and so capable and we knew you'd understand, I want to know, does any of this sound familiar? Drop a word in the comments right now. Even just yes or me too. Because the loneliest part of what I went through wasn't the money. It was the feeling that what was being taken from me was so normal that no one around me could even see it happening. By the time I was 28, I had rebuilt my savings to just over $30,000. I was proud of that. I was careful. I automated my transfers, I barely touched that account, and I had specific goals attached to it: a down payment on a small apartment, a proper emergency fund, a little breathing room in a life that had always been a little too tight. What I didn't know was that 2 things had happened without my knowledge. The first, my parents, in a moment of, I still don't fully understand it, misguided confidence, had added themselves as joint account holders on my savings account. This had happened years earlier, before I moved out, when I was 19 and my mother had helped me open the account. I had never removed them. It had never occurred to me that I needed to. The second, Ryan had started a second business, a restaurant, this time, with a friend of his, and it needed capital. Fast. And my parents had decided, completely without telling me, that the capital would come from me. Not as a loan this time. Not even with a conversation. Just, quietly. Transfer by transfer, across 18 months, while I was living my life, working my job, going to the gym, texting my mother every Sunday, sitting across from her at dinner and not knowing that she was, simultaneously, systematically, emptying the account I had built year by year. $3,000 in March. $5,000 in May. $2,500 in August. $7,000 in November. On and on. I never noticed because I rarely logged into that account. I was saving, the whole point was not to touch it, not to watch it obsessively. I had notifications turned off because I found them anxiety-inducing. I trusted the system. I trusted the process. I trusted my parents. Back to the grocery store. I left the cereal on the counter and walked to my car. I sat there for 40 minutes going through every transaction in my account for the past 18 months. I went through every single one. And when I was done, I had a sick, detailed, complete picture of exactly what had been taken, when it had been taken, and, because it was a joint account and the transfers went to my parents' own account, exactly who had taken it. I drove to my parents' house. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of cumin and onions filled the hallway. My father was watching something in the other room. Everything was so ordinary. So completely, devastatingly ordinary. I put my phone on the kitchen counter, the banking app still open, and I said, "Can you explain this to me?" My mother looked at it. She didn't look confused. She didn't look surprised. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked at me, and what I saw in her face, I'm not sure I have the right word for it. Not guilt. Not quite shame. Something closer to relief. Like she had been waiting for this conversation and was glad it was finally here. She said, "We were going to tell you." I said, "When?" She said, "When the restaurant started doing well. We were going to put it all back." I said, It's been 18 months, Mama. She said, these things take time. I want to tell you that I screamed. I want to tell you that I threw something, or cried, or that the scene became so dramatic and cathartic that I felt something release in my chest. But the truth is I felt nothing. Or not nothing, I felt something I'd never felt before and haven't quite been able to name since. It was the sensation of a floor disappearing. Not falling, just the floor being gone. The foundation I had stood on my whole life suddenly revealed to be not solid at all, but hollow, and I was floating above a hole I hadn't known existed. I picked up my phone. I left. I didn't say anything else. I didn't wait for my father to come in. I got in my car and I drove to my apartment and I sat at my kitchen table and I made a list. The list had 3 columns. Column 1, what they took. Column 2, what I know. Column 3, what I'm going to do. If you've been watching for a while, you already know where this is going. But here's what I need you to understand before we get there: I didn't act immediately. I didn't do anything rash. I didn't call a lawyer that night, or confront them again, or post anything online, or tell a single soul. I waited 3 days. I waited because I needed to be sure. Not sure of what they had done, that was documented, time-stamped, undeniable. I needed to be sure of what I wanted. Because the truth is, in those first 3 days, I cycled through every possible version of this story. The version where I forgave them quietly and we never spoke of it again. The version where I asked them to repay it slowly and trusted them to do it. The version where I walked away from my family entirely. And the version I eventually chose. On the 3rd night, I called my friend Dania. She's an accountant. Not a lawyer, not a detective, an accountant. But she was the person I trusted most to help me look at this clearly and without emotion, because I knew that if I called anyone else in my life, I would end up comforting them while they processed their shock, and I couldn't afford to do that right now. I told Dania everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know this is recoverable, right? Legally, financially, this is recoverable." I said, "I don't want to sue my parents, Dania." She said, "I'm not talking about suing them. I'm talking about being smart. You have documentation. You have 18 months of transactions. You have the paper trail. The question isn't whether you can recover this, the question is how." That was the conversation that changed everything. Not the betrayal. Not the empty account. The word how. I want to stop here for a second because we're reaching the part of the story where things start to move, and I want you here with me for all of it. If this story has hit something in you, if you've ever handed money to your family and felt the strange, unspoken agreement that you would never really get it back, just hit the like button. That's all. Just a little signal to let me know you're here, because I promise the next part is worth staying for. Over the following 2 weeks, I did several things very quietly and very deliberately. I removed my parents from the joint account. This was simpler than I expected: a visit to the branch, a form, a signature. The bank manager asked if everything was okay, and I said yes, we were just simplifying things. I said it so calmly that he smiled and offered me a coffee. I opened a new savings account at a completely different bank. I transferred what remained, which was a number so small I still feel sick typing it, into the new account. I gathered every document I had: bank statements, transaction records, the original account opening paperwork, screenshots of every transfer. And then I made an appointment with a financial lawyer, not a family lawyer, a financial one. Someone who dealt specifically with money disputes and civil recovery. Her name was Miss Farah, and she was one of those women who makes you feel, from the moment you sit across from her, like you have finally found someone on your side. I laid everything on her desk. She went through it in silence for several minutes. Then she said, "Joint account, accessible to both parties, no documented loan agreements." She paused. "This is complicated, but it's far from impossible." She explained my options. Because my parents were joint account holders, they had technically had legal access to the funds. That was the first obstacle. However, there was a legal principle she was confident we could argue: the funds in that account were demonstrably mine. My salary deposits, my contribution history, my sole use of the account for 6 years before any withdrawals, all of it pointed to this being my money, held jointly by name only. Additionally, and this was the part that made me sit up straight, the transfers had all gone directly to my parents' account and then largely to a business venture. There were potentially grounds for a civil claim of unjust enrichment. She said, "If we do this right, you have a strong case." I said, "If we do this right, what does that look like?" She said, "First, we write a formal letter of demand. We give them 30 days to respond with a repayment plan. This is standard, and it gives them a chance to make this right before it becomes a legal matter." I said, "And if they don't respond?" She said, "Then we file." I want to be honest with you about this part, because I think a lot of stories, especially stories like this one, skip over the emotional complexity here in favor of the satisfaction of the revenge arc. And I understand why. The revenge arc feels good. It's clean. It's earned. But the messy, honest truth is that I spent the week after meeting with Miss Farah in a kind of grief I hadn't expected. Because here's what no one tells you about being betrayed by your parents: it doesn't just feel like a crime. It feels like an archaeology. Like you've been handed a shovel and forced to go back through every memory you have and re-examine it under a new light. All the times they called me strong. All the times they said, "You understand, you're not like him." All the times I felt proud of my own reliability. Was I strong? Or was I useful? Was I trusted? Or was I accessible? I lay awake more than one night asking myself whether the love had ever been real, and I think that question, not the money, not the legal battle, not the betrayal itself, was the hardest part of all of it. I don't have a clean answer. I still don't. Love and exploitation can exist in the same heart simultaneously. People can mean well and do wrong. Parents can love you and still fail to see you as fully separate from themselves, separate enough that your savings account is not a family resource. But understanding that didn't make it okay. Understanding people's limitations doesn't mean absorbing their consequences. The formal letter went out through Ms. Farah's office on a Tuesday. My parents received it on a Thursday. My mother called me that Thursday night. I let it go to voicemail. My father called me the next morning. I let that go to voicemail too. My brother called me on Saturday. I answered for Ryan. He was calm, which surprised me. I had expected defensiveness or panic. Instead, he sounded tired and sad, and like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a while and had been waiting for permission to put it down. He said, "I didn't know they took it from your account specifically. I thought they had savings. I thought," he stopped. "I wouldn't have let them. I want you to know that. I wouldn't have let them do that." I said, "Ryan, the restaurant is funded with my money." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." He said, "What do you need from me?" That question. 4 words. It was the first time in this entire experience that someone in my family had asked me that, "What do I need?" and the simplicity of it almost broke me open. I said, "I need the money back. All of it. And I need everyone to understand that this isn't something I'm going to let go of because it's uncomfortable." He said, "Okay." He said, "I'll talk to them." For those of you who are watching this right now and have never been the financially responsible sibling, or the one who always gives, always covers, always absorbs the cost of keeping the peace, I genuinely want to know. What would you have done? Would you have pushed for legal action, or tried to keep it in the family? No judgment at all, I mean that. Tell me in the comments, because I've asked myself this question 100 times and I'm still not sure there's a universally right answer. The 30 days passed. My parents did not respond to the letter directly. They responded through Ryan, who became an unlikely and awkward mediator, calling me every few days with updates, clearly wanting to fix something he hadn't broken. What my parents offered, through Ryan, a verbal promise to repay in installments, no timeline specified, no documentation, because we're family and we shouldn't need paperwork between us. I went back to Ms. Farah. She didn't blink. She said, "We file." And so we did. The civil claim was filed. I want to be honest about what happened after that, because I think sometimes these stories are told as if justice arrives cleanly and quickly, the way it does in films, one filing, one hearing, one gavel, and it's done. Real legal processes are slow. There are paperwork in waiting rooms and phone calls that go unreturned for days. They are moments of doubt where you wonder if you are doing the right thing or simply the painful thing. They are your mother leaving you a voicemail saying, "I never thought you would do this to us," in a voice that sounds genuinely wounded, and you having to sit with the discomfort of the fact that the person who wronged you also loves you, and the person who loves you also wronged you, and both of those things are true at the same time. But here's what else the legal process was. It was a document filed with a court that said, "This happened, here is the evidence, and this woman is not going to absorb this quietly." That document, just its existence, changed everything. Because within 10 days of the claim being filed, I received a call from a family solicitor my parents had hired. Not Ms. Farah. A different lawyer, representing my parents. And that lawyer's first question was, "Is there any possibility of settling this outside of court?" I knew, at that moment, that I had already won. Not because I was vindictive. Not because I wanted to drag my parents through a courtroom. But because the question itself was an admission, an acknowledgement, finally, on paper, through a professional, that something had happened that needed to be settled. That this wasn't a misunderstanding. That this wasn't a family matter that could be swept under a rug with a Sunday dinner and a vague promise. Something had been taken. Something needed to be returned. Ms. Farah and I discussed the settlement terms carefully. I did not ask for damages. I did not ask for interest, though I was entitled to request it. I asked for one thing only. The full amount. Every dollar. Repaid within 6 months, in documented installments, with a signed agreement. The solicitor came back 2 days later. My parents agreed. Let me tell you about the day I signed the settlement agreement. It was a gray morning in October. I sat across from Miss Farah in her office, the same chair I'd sat in when I'd first laid those bank statements on her desk, 6 months earlier, feeling like the ground had opened beneath me. She slid the agreement toward me. I read every line. I'm not the kind of person who signs things without reading them, even when I'm tired, even when I just want it to be over. That habit had been expensive earlier in my life. I wasn't going to let it cost me again. I signed. Ms. Farah said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Tired." And okay. She smiled. She said, "That's usually what justice feels like. Not like winning. Like being allowed to breathe again." She was right. The installments came in, on schedule, every month. The first one arrived 2 weeks after the agreement was signed. I didn't spend it. I transferred it directly into my new savings account, the one at the new bank, the one only I had access to, the one I had opened alone. I watched the number grow back, slowly, the way I had built it the first time, except this time, there was something different. Not just the money. Something in me. I had done something I'd never done before in my family. I had said, "This is mine." And I had meant it. And I had defended it. My relationship with my parents is different now. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't wrap it in false resolution. We still see each other. We speak. My mother still makes the cumin and onion dinner on Sunday evenings and occasionally invites me, and occasionally I go. My father still watches things in the other room and nods when I walk in, and there is love in the nod, complicated love, the kind that doesn't quite know how to carry what happened but carries it anyway. We don't talk about it. Maybe we should. Maybe someday we will. But right now, the shape of our relationship is this: I love them, and I see them clearly, and I no longer organize my own financial life around their needs. I no longer say yes because I am strong. I no longer let "we're family" be the sentence that ends the conversation before my needs have a chance to enter it. That is not nothing. In fact, that might be the most valuable thing I recovered. Not the $47,000, though I needed that too. The understanding that being someone's daughter does not make you their resource. And Ryan and I are okay. We had a long conversation, not about money, eventually, but about the patterns in our family and how we both had different roles in them and what we each wanted differently going forward. He's still running the restaurant. It's doing well, actually. He knows what part of its foundation came from. I think he'll carry that. I think he should. I don't know if that's forgiveness. But it's something. It's a beginning of something, anyway. This is where I want you to stay with me for just one more minute, because I need to say something before the final question, and I need you to really hear it. If you are the strong one, if you are the one your family goes to, the one who always understands, the one who has been saying yes so long that no has started to feel impossible, I want you to know something. The money they take is recoverable. The time is not. But the person you are underneath the sacrifices, the one who wanted things for herself, who had plans, who deserved to be asked instead of assumed, she is still there. She is always still there. Protecting her is not selfish. It is not cold. It is not undaughterly or unloving or hard-hearted. It is necessary. It took me 31 years to understand that the most loving thing I could do, for myself, and honestly, even for my family, was to stop being infinitely available. Strong doesn't mean hollow. And love, real love, the kind worth having, doesn't cost you everything. Before I go, if this story reached something in you, if it made you feel seen, or angry, or quietly understood, please hit like and subscribe. I make these stories for the women who've been told they're strong for so long they've forgotten they're also allowed to be protected. Your support keeps this channel going, and I read every comment. And speaking of comments, here is today's final question, and I genuinely want to know. If you discovered that someone you completely trusted had been draining your savings, would you keep it private to protect the relationship, or would you go legal, even if it meant burning the bridge? Where is your line? Tell me below. No wrong answers. I'll be reading.